In this week's parsha, we read of the tragic passing of Rachel Imenu and her burial outside of Vayishlach. She wasn't brought to the Maras Machpelah. And the question, of course, is that what was the cause of this tragic, premature passing? Rashi, in last week's parsha, relates this to the fact that when Lavan confronted Yaakov, that why did you steal the Truffim? So Yaakov Avinu said, Im asher timtzoas eleihacha lo yichyeh. Whoever stole the Truffim shall not live. Of course, the pasuk says, V'lo yoda Yaakov ki Rachel gnova sam. Yaakov didn't know that Rachel was the thief. So Rashi says, Me'isa klala meisa Rachel b'derech. So that curse, even though Yaakov certainly would not have wanted to curse Rachel, but the Kilulas Tzaddik comes true in any case. If he gave this klala, as a consequence, Rachel died. That's the pshat of Rashi. In the Ramban, a different picture emerges. The Ramban discusses this in three places. Interestingly enough, none of them are in our parsha. The Ramban in Parshas told us raises the question, famous question. Chazal tell us the Avos kept Kol Torah Kula Ashlei Nitna. The Avos kept the entire Torah before it was given. So how was it that Yaakov married two sisters? So the Ramban explains that the reason the Avos kept Kol Torah Kula before they were commanded is because there are two aspects to Torah. First of all, HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded us to keep the Torah. We have to keep the Torah. But secondly, it's also Mishpat Elohei Haaretz. It's also the law of the God of the land. Meaning, if you want to live in Eretz Yisrael, these are the laws of the land. You have to live by the law. And the others weren't commanded. They weren't included to keep the Torah because of a command. The command wasn't given until Har Sinai. But they observed the Torah in Eretz Yisrael as Mishpat Elohei Haaretz. This is the law of the God of the land. And therefore the others only kept the Torah in Eretz Yisrael. In Chutz La'aretz, they didn't observe the Torah. And that's how Yaakov married two sisters in Chutz La'aretz. That's what the Ramban says in Parshas Toldos. In Parshas Achrei Mos, the Ramban expands on this idea. There in Parshas Achrei Mos, there's a long discussion about Eretz Yisrael. The interesting fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells us that if we don't observe the Arayas, Eretz Yisrael will expel us. It will vomit out the offenders. So the question is, asks the Ramban, that the Arayas aren't mitzvahs atluyas ba'aretz, they're related to Eretz Yisrael. Why should there be more of a consequence in Eretz Yisrael than outside of Eretz Yisrael? So the Ramban here has a long arichus, again discussing the special importance of observing the mitzvahs in Eretz Yisrael, the idea of Mishpat Elohei Haaretz. This is the law of the God of the land. And there he returns back to Yaakov Avinu, and he gives us more information. He says, V'Hashem lo levado niskanu alilos. But Rebbeinu Shalom alone ordains the steps of man. Shemeisa Rachel baderech v'tchilas bayom ba'aretz. Rachel died just as they came back to Eretz Yisrael, shortly after they arrived back. Ki b'schusa lo meisa b'chutz la'aretz. She had a schus that she didn't die in Chutz La'aretz. Really, she should have died in Chutz La'aretz because Yaakov should not have had two sisters in Eretz Yisrael. So really should have died in Chutz La'aretz. But she had a schus, and therefore she didn't die in Chutz La'aretz. She had the schus to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu delayed her death until she came to Eretz Yisrael. Ubischuso, and Yaakov had a schus, the lo yoshav ba'aretz im shtei achias, that he didn't live in Eretz Yisrael married to two sisters. Because once he was back in Eretz Yisrael, he had to observe the halakha of the Torah. and therefore he had a schus that Rachel died, and that he didn't end up living with two sisters in Eretz Yisrael. Now the question is, so why did Rachel die? Why not Leah? The answer is, Vihi Haisa Hanisas Be'isr Ha'achba. Because Rachel was the one he married Be'isr, because he married Leah first. So Leah was the permissible one, Rachel was the prohibited one, so in Chutz La'aretz it was okay. But once they came back to Eretz Yisrael, Rachel was the prohibited sister, and therefore Rachel died. Listen, the Ramban says, V'nira Sh'nis Abra mi Binyamin Kaidam Bayam B'Shchem. That she became pregnant with Binyamin before they came back to Eretz Yisrael. V'lei noga ba ba'aretz klal. He didn't touch her after they arrived in Eretz Yisrael. Because of this reason that we explained. That in Eretz Yisrael, he couldn't be married to two sisters, so he didn't touch her. He had no relations with her after they came back to Eretz Yisrael. Binyamin was conceived when they still were in Chutz La'aretz. And he didn't touch her after they came back to Eretz Yisrael. Because in Eretz Yisrael, he couldn't be married to two sisters. And that's why she died. That Yaakov should not be married to two sisters in Eretz Yisrael. Now, the Ramban in Parshas Vayechi adds another detail, which clarifies, I believe, a question you've been asking the Ramban. That l'chara, if there was an Aveira here, that Yaakov was married to two sisters, why did the consequence fall on Rachel? Why not on Yaakov? Whereas why is she the victim? Why is she to blame? So the Ramban in Parshas Vayechi adds a detail. Very interesting Ramban. The Ramban is discussing another issue, which we really could also talk about this week, which is the fact that Rachel was not buried in the Maras Machpelah. And again, the Ramban does not discuss that in this week's Parsha, but in Parshas Vayechi, Rashi and the Ramban both discuss it. Because when Yaakov asked Yosef to take him for burial in Eretz Yisrael, so Yaakov felt obliged to mention the fact that he didn't bury Yosef's mother in the Maras Machpelah. So he says, he relates the story of Ani, Beloyim, Hadon, when I was coming back, Rachel died, and I had to bury her on the road. So Rashi quotes the famous Medrash, which we'll refer to a little bit later, that there was a purpose, because when the exiles left Eretz Yisrael on their way to Bavel, they davened over there, and Rachel davened for them over there. That's the pasuk in Yirmiyah, that Rachel mavaka al boneha, Rachel cried for her children, and the HaKadosh Baruch Hu answered, Yisachar l'pulaseich, that your tefillos will be answered, D'shavu vanim l'gvulam. Now the Ramban quotes this medrash, and the Ramban says, obviously that's a valid defense. As Yaakov Avinu was saying that I buried her there for a good reason. But al derech hapshat, you don't have to come on to that. Because Yaakov Avinu is simply saying that she died in travel, and the funeral couldn't be delayed, and therefore we have to bury her at the side of the road. So there are simpler interpretations to the pasuk. But the Ramban says, and this is the part I want to quote, V'ani sover, but I think, Shehayu elu divrei hisnatlus, that everything that Yaakov said, whether you go with the Medrash, whether you go al derech hapshat, is really just an excuse. There was a different reason why he didn't bury her in the Maras Machpelah. Aval hakavana liYaakov shlo ha'ilach ha'salam ma'ara, the reason he didn't take her to the Maras Machpelah, k'dei shlo yikbar sham im shtei achayas, he shouldn't be buried there with two sisters, because he had two wives, Rachel and Leah, so really both of them should have been buried with him in the Maras Machpelah. So he didn't want to be buried in the Maras Machpelah with two sisters, ki yevash me'avaisav. He embarrassed of his forefathers, embarrassed from Avram and from Yitzchak, that he should be buried in the Maras Machpelah with two sisters. And therefore, Leah he anisas loy rishayna beheter. Leah married him first, that was beheter, and therefore she had precedence for the Maras Machpelah. And this is the important line, the Rachel, ba'alvaso oisa, because he loved her, b'neder asher nadar lo, because of the promise he made to her, likacha, he married her. But what is the Ramban coming to explain? The Ramban is coming to ask him, so why did Yaakov marry Rachel? Okay, he wanted to marry Rachel. But then Lavan switched him, and he ended up marrying Leah. So at that point, why did Yaakov marry Rachel? He knew that sooner or later he'd be coming back to Eretz Yisrael, and he'd have to answer to Avram and Yitzchak that he was married to two sisters. So what was the cheshbon? The cheshbon was because he had made a neder, he had made a promise to Rachel to marry her, and therefore he kept the promise. He kept the promise. Now, in theory, Rachel could have released him from the promise. So I think that the Ramban is coming to explain to us why the responsibility fell on Rachel. Because Yaakov had no choice. Because Lavan switched the two. So Yaakov married Leah first. And now the question is, should he marry Rachel? Well, he made a pledge, he made a neder. He was bound by the neder. Only Rachel could have released him from the neder. Apparently she didn't. So Yaakov was bound. So therefore Yaakov is not blameworthy for having married two sisters. So therefore when they came back to Eretz Yisrael, and in Eretz Yisrael the Avos observed the Torah, the consequence fell on Rachel, not on Yaakov. Just want to point out, Agav, that this explains another interesting thing. In the Parsha of the Dudoyim, when Rachel wanted the Dudoyim, so Leah says, Hama'at karteches ishi, it wasn't enough you took my husband, and now you want to take my son's flowers also? So what is Leah's taina? You took my husband? Right? The answer is very, very simple. The answer is, because really, Rachel should have released Yaakov from the vow, and Yaakov wouldn't have married Rachel. But Rachel did not release Yaakov, and therefore that's why Yaakov married her. So therefore Leah has a taina on Rachel. Isn't it enough you took my husband? I just want to point out an interesting thing, something that you may not know. There's a fantastic Ramban in Parshas Achrei Mos on the Isser of Achais Isha, on the Isser of marrying two sisters. Now the Isser of marrying two sisters is different than all the other arayas. Because all the other arayas are also even after the death of the first one. For example, I can't marry, I shouldn't say a person cannot marry his father's wife even after his father's death. Not his father's wife anymore. But once the issue is chal, the issue remains. The one exception to that rule is achais isha. The pasuk says, Isha el achais lesikach. You can't marry your wife's sister, litzror, to form a bundle, legalos ervasa aleha b'chayeha, to reveal her nakedness during the lifetime of the first sister you're married to. But when the first sister dies, you're allowed to marry the second sister. And this is an exception. This is the only case in all of the arayas where the issue is only when they're both alive, but if one dies, you can marry the other. So the Ramban is troubled. Why should this be an exception? So the Ramban says a fantastic thing. He says that here, by writing this word litzror, to bundle the sisters together, the Torah is revealing to me the reason for this prohibition. The reason for this prohibition, that it's unlike any of the other arayas. Because here, you're really not related. In other words, all the other arayas are relatives, either actual relatives or relatives through marriage, but here, if you marry two sisters, you're not related to one any more than the other. So really two sisters should be permitted. He says, why is it asur? So says the Ramban, it's litzror. The Torah says that two sisters should love each other, they should not become competitors. And therefore, to marry two sisters is putting the sisters in a situation where they're competitors with each other. And it's amazing, that's what you see. In last week's parsha, that's exactly you see, this tragic situation where Yaakov is married to Rachel and Leah, and they become competitors. Competitors for having children, competitors for being the mother figure in the lives of the children, and the parsha of the Dudoim, it all comes out. That Leah says, Hamat karteches ishi, it's not enough you took my husband, now you want my son's flowers also? So the two sisters were turned against each other. But the interesting thing is that we all wonder, what was Leah's taina? I mean, Leah would have had nothing if not for Rachel acquiescing or persisting in Lavan's subterfuge. How is it possible that Leah could have a taina on Rachel? The answer is that after Yaakov married Leah, Rachel should have said, no, okay, I'm a vater, I give up. Because Yaakov is no longer bound to marry me. But he didn't do so. She didn't do so, I should say. And Yaakov kept his vow, kept his neder. As a consequence, he married Rachel too. But that marriage could only last in Eretz Yisrael. Once he came to Chutz La'aretz, only in Chutz La'aretz. Once he came to Eretz Yisrael, then he couldn't be married to two sisters, and that's why Rachel died. That's what emerges from the Ramban. The question you have to ask is, the Ramban says that the reason he didn't bury Rachel in the Maras Machpelah is he would have been embarrassed to face Avraham and Yitzchak. He would have been embarrassed me'avaisa. And the question is, if he had a legitimate cheshbon, that he was bound by a neder, so why would he be embarrassed? You know, it's funny. You hear sometimes stories, people get caught in a crime, and when they're caught, they ask the police, the prosecutors, the news media, don't reveal the crime, because it'll be an embarrassment for my family. There's a very simple response to that. You should have thought about that before you committed the crime. You don't want your family to be embarrassed. Don't do the thing which is wrong. So here too, in other words, if Yaakov would have had a choice, so we would say, he shouldn't have done it. But if he had no choice, why should he be embarrassed? He did what he had to do. And the answer to that question, by the way, is a very simple answer. Now, sometimes a person finds himself in a situation where he has to do something. He has no choice. Okay? He's not to blame for doing what he has to do. As the saying goes, that what you have to do isn't blameworthy. But why did it come to that? Why did it come to such a situation that he had no choice? Why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu put him in that situation? It must be that there was some chet that resulted in his being put in this situation. Because Lavan cheated Yaakov. How is it possible that Lavan should be able to cheat Yaakov? Why wasn't Yaakov Zoicha to be spared from Lavan's designs? So it must be that there was some element of chet. And that's why Lavan was able to take advantage of him. So therefore, Yaakov would be embarrassed, not because he married two sisters. He'd be embarrassed, what did he do to be in that situation that he'd have to marry two sisters? So that's an embarrassment. So therefore, to avoid that, he didn't bury Rachel in the Maras Machpelah. That's what the Ramban says. Okay, this is all very, very interesting. But I'd like to point out a medrash, which we've said many times. Medrash Tanchuma in Parshas Vayeshev. The pasuk says, "L'chu chazul mefalos Elokim." See the works of the Ribono Shel Olam. Noira alila al bnei adam. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu is awesome in the pretenses that He places upon human beings. In other words, He corners human beings into situations in a wondrous way. So the Medrash says that this can be explained with a mashal. There once was a man who decided to divorce his wife. Why did he want to divorce his wife? He found someone prettier. He decides to divorce his wife. So he has a get written, and he comes home with the get. But he's embarrassed to give her a get, just because he found someone prettier. So he asks her, make me a cup of hot water. And she makes a cup of hot water. And he takes a sip. Says, "Ooh, it's only lukewarm. It's terrible. Here's your get." And he divorces her. So she says to him, "Look," says, "if it makes you feel better, so you can tell people that you divorced me because I can't cook hot water." He says, "But you know that's not the reason why. The proof being that you wrote the get before you asked him to make the water. So obviously you're planning on divorcing me anyway. So it's only a pretense. It's only an excuse." So likewise, the Medrash says, the Ribbon Shloila made the Malach HaMoves on the first day. Because it says in the Pasuk, the Chayshech al Pnei Sahayim. There was darkness in the face of the deep. What is darkness in the face of the deep? That refers to the Malach HaMoves. The Malach HaMoves was made on the first day. And the Kodesh Baruch Hu only brought Misa into the world on the sixth day as a consequence of the Chet of Eitz Hadas. So how can that be if the Malach HaMoves was made on the first day? So it says the Medrash, HaKadosh Baruch Hu planned the Shemi Misa all along. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to bring it about through a consequence of our own actions. So he made an alila, he made a pretense that he give Adam Rishon a mitzvah, he'd be mevatel a mitzvah, he'd Eitz Hadas, you're deserving of death, but death really was in the works from the very beginning. That's what the Medrash says. The Medrash gives other illustrations. Now the idea is this. The Ramchal writes in the Sefer Das Tvunas that there are two ways in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs the world. There is what is called the Hanhagas HaMishpat. This is HaKadosh Baruch Hu responds to our actions. As we do good things, there's a reward. We do bad things, there's punishment. And there's Hanhagas HaYichud. Hanhagas HaYichud is that Ribono Shel Olam runs the world, he conducts the world in a manner to achieve his master plan. The master plan has to be fulfilled in any case. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu somehow reconciles the two methods so that the master plan is achieved seemingly as a response to our actions. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu sets up the scenario by which he ostensibly responds to our actions, but in reality, he's bringing about the fulfillment of the master plan. So this is an amazing thing. Like, how do you reconcile all these cheshbonos? But that's the Ribono Shel Olam. He does that. So, on the one hand, Misa seems to be a consequence of the Chet of Adam HaRishon, even though in reality the Malach HaMoves was created before. And the Medrash gives another example, that we know that there was a Gzeira, that the Jews would have to go down to Mitzrayim. It was decreed in the time of Avraham Avinu, and yet, as the events unfold, it seems that it is entirely the consequence of decisions that the brothers made about Yosef, selling him, and so on and so forth. So this is the amazing thing that Ribono Shel Olam does, is Nora Alila, that he fulfills the master plan by bringing about pretenses by which his fulfillment of the master plan appears to be a reaction and response to our deeds. That's the amazing message. And likewise over here. It seems over here that the picture that emerges from our discussion is that Yaakov was guilty of some chet, maybe a small chet. As a consequence, Lavan was able to switch Rachel and Leah. As a consequence, he married Leah first. He married Rachel because now he has a promise which he has to keep. But as a consequence, they come to Eretz Yisrael. He can't be married to two sisters. Rachel dies. No, everything is a consequence of decisions that are made and responses to those decisions. But there must be another cheshbon too. There must be a deeper cheshbon. There's a reason why Yaakov's plan was frustrated. Why Yaakov thought to marry Rachel, and why HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought it about that in fact he should marry Leah first, and everything which follows. I'd like to discuss that a little bit tonight. Let's tackle it from the end. In this week's parsha, we have another interesting section where Yaakov Avinu is given the new name Yisrael. Yisrael, of course, is a name which attests to the highest madrega. There's a very wonderful Arachayim in the beginning of Parshas Vayechi, which attempts to go through the last several parshias and explain exactly why in every case is the name Yaakov used or is the name Yisrael used, and he takes this approach. Yaakov is the lower level, Yisrael is the higher level. In each instance, there's a reason why that name was selected. But Yisrael is the name that's given to him, Ki Sarisa im Elokim v'Manashim v'Tu Jul, that you contended with a malach, you contended with people, Asa, Lavan, and you were victorious. So, consequently, you're given the name Yisrael. The name was actually given to him by the Ribono Shel Olam after he built the Mizbeach in Beis Kel, but it was foretold by the Malach that he fought with that the time will come that you will get the name. In that encounter with the Malach, when the Malach informed him that you will be Zeicher to that lofty, lofty name of Yisrael, which attests to your spectacular achievements, at the same time, he was given a hint of a deficiency. That he was injured in the thigh, the Gid Hanasha, Vateka Kapierach Yaakov, the He'avko Imo, and that was a remez. To what? So the Ramban brings in Medrash Rabbah that it's a remez to the tzaddikim that would emerge from Yaakov, later generations, in Darchei Shel Shmad, in the generation of forced conversions, that these previously righteous people would give up their Judaism, they would succumb to the temptation in Darchei Shel Shmad, in the generation of forced apostasy. Now the question is that at the very same time that HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Malach are informing Yaakov Avinu of his greatest achievements, at the very same moment there is this hint, but you should know there's going to be apostates that emerge from you in Darchei Shel Shmad. How do you understand that? In other words, at the very same moment that the Malach is coming to praise Yaakov and to boost Yaakov and to tell him how magnificent his achievements are, he mentions, but you should know that there's going to be in Darchei Shel Shmad people that come from you that aren't so righteous. Rav Hutner Zecher Tzaddik Levracha talks about this question in several places. He talks about it in the Pach Yitzchak and Sukkot, in the Pach Yitzchak and Chanukah, and he says an amazing pshat. He says like this. Maybe I'm saying it a little differently than he says it, but this is the idea he brings out. Because what is the perfection of Yaakov? What is the shleimus of Yaakov? Now the Sifri points out in Parshas Hazinu and in Parshas Zos Bracha that Avram Avinu Yotzim Menu Psailas. There was waste that came from him. He had two children, Yitzchak, Yishmael. Yishmael was the Psailas, was the waste. Yitzchak was the pure product. Yitzchak had two children, Yaakov and Esav. Esav was the Psailas. Yaakov was the pure product. Yaakov was mitaso shleim. Yaakov, all his children were righteous. So we tend to think that the Maila of Yaakov is that his children were all righteous. There was no psailas. Everything that came out was perfect. And in a sense, that is true. All his children were righteous. And of course, Yaakov Avinu wanted that. He yearned for this. If you go back to Parshas Vayetze, last week's Parsha, when Yaakov Avinu made his neder to the Ribono Shel Olam, and he says, if Hashem guards me and protects me, and he gives me clothing to wear and food to eat, and V'haya Hashem li le'elokim. And Rashi learns that that is not the promise, that is part of the condition. This is what he wants from the Ribono Shel Olam. V'haya Hashem li le'elokim. And Rashi says, what does that mean? That he wants that Hashem should be for him le'elokim. Rashi says, Sheyichol Shemai Olai Matchila B'ad Saif, that the divine name should rest on me from beginning to end. Shlo Yimtza Psul B'Zari. There should be no defect in my children. My children should all be perfect, which in fact was the case. So Yaakov Avinu wanted this very much. But Rav Hutner points out that really the shleimus of Yaakov is something else. This is an amazing thing. Chazal tell us that Yisrael Afal Pi Shechata Yisrael. If a Jew sins, he remains a Jew. even if he sins terribly, he becomes a mummer, he becomes an apostate, he becomes an Oived Avodah Zarah, he remains a Jew. That only began with Yaakov Avinu. Because Esav is not a Jew. Right? When Esav went off the derech, so to speak, he became disconnected from the body of Klal Yisrael. He be-Yitzchak yikar l'chazara, be-Yitzchak v'lo kol Yitzchak. Esav was eliminated. The Hanhaga, the idea that Yisrael, Afal Pi Shechata Yisrael, begins with Yaakov Avinu. Begins with Yaakov Avinu. Because what does that mean? Why is that? How did that happen? How did it happen that from this point onward, you can't give up your Jewishness? Says Rav Hutner, the idea is as follows: that Yaakov Avinu established such a strong kesher, such a strong bond to the Ribono Shel Olam, that bond cannot be broken. In other words, until Yaakov Avinu, the bond could be broken. If a person will become an apostate, he becomes severed from the body of Klal Yisrael. Yishmael is removed. Esav is removed. But Yaakov's kesher, Yaakov's bond is so strong that his descendants, even if they become apostates, are still connected to Klal Yisrael. That is the virtue of Yaakov Avinu. The virtue of Yaakov Avinu is not simply that all his children are perfect. The virtue of Yaakov Avinu is that his kesher to the Ribono Shel Olam is so strong that there is no possibility of severing that kesher, severing that bond. And that's why he can have children and descendants, great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren who are Rishoyim, and they still remain Jews. Until Yaakov, such a thing wasn't possible. Because until Yaakov, if a descendant of Avram would go off the derech, he's out of the fold. He's severed from the family. The family is perfect, perfectly pure, because anyone who breaks away is out of the family. So Yaakov establishes such a strong kesher that you can't break the kesher. And therefore, that's a wonderful thing on the one hand, but on the other hand, it introduces the possibility of having Jewish apostates. And he quotes the beautiful lashon of the Chazal. Chazal, in the Sifri in Parshas Hazinu, on the pasuk which says, Yaakov chevel nachlaso, which literally means Yaakov is the rope of his inheritance. Chevel means a rope. So the Sifri says, brings the pasuk in Kehelas, that chut hamashulush lo mehere yinasek, that a 3-ply rope can't be snapped. Meaning that Avram was a single strand. Yitzchak, there were 2 strands. With Yaakov, it became a chut hamashulush, and therefore it can't be broken. Doesn't mean no one is going to try. People are going to try, but it can't happen. So a person can become a Hindu, he can become a Muslim, he can become an atheist, he can become whatever. But his kesher to the fabric of Klal Yisrael is unbroken. And this is why, says Rav Hutner, that in this experience with the Malach, where the Malach is praising Yaakov and extolling him and bestowing upon him the great name of Yisrael, he's meramis to him that there are going to be people in Darchei or Shemad who are going to give up their religion. So the question we asked is that, are you coming to praise Yaakov or to bury him? And the answer is, this is the praise of Yaakov. The praise of Yaakov is that Yaakov's kesher to the Ribono Shel Olam is so strong, it creates a new possibility of even Yisrael Mumar, apostate Jews. That even if they become pagans or idolaters, they still remain connected because there's something which is binding them to the fabric of Klal Yisrael. An amazing, amazing idea. The Ramchal in the Sefer Das Tvunos says a very interesting thing. Now, before I quote it, just want to point out that the Das Tvunos is really a Sefer Kabbalah, which is not written in the terminology of Kabbalah. Now, if you look at the Kisvei Arizal, for example, the writings of the Arizal in Kabbalah, he uses mashalim, he uses metaphors. And sometimes it isn't clear what the nimshal is. What did the mashalim come to represent? The Ramchal wrote Svarim in Kabbalah where he explains the nimshal, he explains the idea without using the mashal. So the Das Tfunos has many ideas of Kabbalah without using the terms of Kabbalah. But it was pointed out by the publishers that the Ramchal wrote other Svarim of Kabbalah where he does use the Lashonis, the terminology of Kabbalah, and if you compare the Das Tfunos to the other Svarim, you can see the ideas of Kabbalah to which he's referring. So there's a sefer called Sefer HaKlalim of the Ramchal, and there he uses the traditional terminology of Kabbalah, but it's clear, if you study the parallels, what he's coming to speak about in the Das Tfunos and what it corresponds to in the Sefer HaKlalim. So in the Sefer Das Tfunos, he says an amazing thing. He says like this. I'll read you the words. I'm going to inform you of another fundamental idea. V'hu sheyesh leknesses Yisrael shirish shel kedusha. Klal Yisrael has a root of holiness. She klalis l'chol hu'uma hakadoisha mitzad hayosim Yisrael. This is something which all Jews partake of, all Jews share in, simply in as much as they're Jewish. There's nothing to do with being a tzaddik or being a Talmud Chacham. Every Jew is bound to this spiritual root. Even the most evil Jews. Chazal say, that a Jew, even if he sins, is a Yisrael. And therefore, inasmuch as he is a Yisrael, he is bound to this Shirish HaKadusha. But then he says, there's another Shirish, which is L'fi inyan ha'avodah sheba, where Hashem relates to us in accordance with the extent to which we serve Him. Our mitzvahs, our Torah, our averos. And for the most part, says Ramchal, that which happens to us in the world is a consequence of that. Meaning, if we are successful and prosperous in Eretz Yisrael with the Beis HaMikdash, that's because of our good deeds. If we find ourselves in Golos, it's because of our averos. So a lot that happens to Jews is because of this second shirish. The second shirish is the root of responses to our various deeds. But there's another shirish which doesn't discriminate between the tzaddikim and the rishoyim. Yisrael, Afa B'Shachata is Yisrael, and all Jews are rooted in that. The Havana seems to be that every Jew has a connection to Kedusha, even if his actions don't reflect it. And the Magia of Chaim Friedlander in the footnote points out that this is the basis of tshuva. Because how does a person do tshuva? He's so estranged from Torah, from mitzvahs, Jewish life, Jewish practice. How does he come to tshuva? It's because it's true that as far as the second shirish goes, where your connection to the Ribono Shel Olam is a function of your actions, this person is pretty much cut off. But there's a first shirish which extends itself to every Jew, righteous or wicked, Yisrael, Afa B'Shachata Yisrael, and that shirish extends itself to every individual, and since every soul has its root in Kedusha, that can be the basis for return, for coming back, for being aroused, and so on and so forth. And this is what the Ramchal says. This is a fairly straightforward idea. The Ramchal in the Sefer Klalim says that in the Sifrei Mekubalim, these two Hanhagas are called Leah and Rachel. The Hanhaga Lefi HaMaasim is called Rachel. And the Hanhaga, which is Lefi, every Jew has, that is called Leah. That's what the Mekubalim say. There are two Shirashim of Klal Yisrael. There's the Shirish of Rachel, and there's the Shirish of Leah. Rachel is HaKadosh Baruch Hu responding to the mitzvahs, to the Torah, to the good deeds, to the Averos. There are ups and downs. That's the Hanhaga of Rachel. And then there's Leah, which is Kedusha, which extends to every person. There is no difference, Tzadikim, Rishayim, and so on and so forth. Now, with this, Ramchal explains, there's a lashon in the Zohar HaKadosh. The Zohar HaKadosh says that Rachel is called Alma de Isgalia. Rachel is called the revealed world. And Leah is called the Alma de Iskasia. It's called the concealed world. And the Ramchal says this is what it means. Because in this world, when we look around, it seems that there are ups and downs. There is reward, there is punishment. Our closeness to the Rebbeinu Shalom or our distance from Him seems to be a function of our deeds. We do more mitzvahs, more attached, fewer mitzvahs, less attached. There are times of Geula, times of Galus. That's the Hanhaga of Rachel, that's the Alma de Isgalia. That's revealed. We all see that. Right? We don't see that in some fundamental sense, it makes no difference whether it's a time of Geula or a time of Golos, whether it's Tzadikim, whether it's Rishayim. Every Jew is bound to the Rebbeinu Shalom. That's concealed. That's the Alma de Iskasia. That's the concealed world. That isn't so readily apparent. So the idea of Rachel is Alma de Isgalia. The idea of Leah is Alma de Iskasia. That's what it says. Now the truth is that obviously Rachel and Leah are being used as Mishalim here, but the truth is, and Tzadok HaKayin talks about this in the Sefer Tzidkas HaTzadik, that the actual people, Rachel and Leah, also very much are this way. It says the Yaakov Avinu wanted to marry Rachel. What does the Torah tell us about Rachel? What is the one thing the Torah tells us about her? She was very beautiful. So what does that mean? Because Yaakov was attracted by her physical beauty, it's wanting to marry her? She was a knockout? What does it mean? It says Rachel was beautiful, Yaakov wants to marry her. And Leah wasn't so beautiful. So what does that mean? So Tzadok says like this, that beauty here means tikkun hamasim, yofi hamasim, the beauty of her deeds. Because Yaakov was able to see, maybe he saw with Ruach HaKodesh, the beautiful, beautiful deeds of Rachel. Her midas, her hanhaga, her avodas Hashem. He saw beautiful things in her. And accordingly, he wanted to marry her. He wanted that she should be the Shirish of Klal Yisrael. She should be the mother that would give birth to the Shvatim. That's what he saw. Leah was not so visibly beautiful. In fact, the famous Medrash says that Leah cried a lot. Because people said, oh, it's a wonderful thing. Yitzchak has 2 sons. Lavan has 2 daughters. Hagdoilo legadol, Haktana lekatan. Right? Rachel, the younger, is perfectly suited for Yaakov, the younger. And Leah, the older, is perfectly suited for Esav. People used to say that. Now she would cry to the Rebbeinu Shalom, let me not fall into the hands of Esav. And we pointed out that when it says people used to say, it doesn't mean that people used to say. They were right. It really was that way. If you remember, we explained about Esav 2 weeks ago, that Esav had tremendous power, but it wouldn't have been because Esav was naturally righteous. And there were midas that were awful, that had to be worked through and worked around and worked over. But if he would have made better decisions, he would have worked on himself, he could have been successful. That's what Leah was. Because Leah wasn't beautiful in that sense. But she had tremendous spiritual potential. What did she have? she had that one thing. She had that nukuda, that little core of kedusha in herself that could be the basis for self-improvement, for tshuva, for tikkun. And she was better than Esav. She did work on herself. And she made something out of herself. But it wasn't as beautiful as Rachel. Why? And Reb Tzadok says an amazing thing. He says, listen, Chazal tell us that b'makom shebalei tshuva oimdim ein tzadikim gemurim b'chabal namar. Chazal tell us that the Baal Tshuva is really more beautiful than the Tzaddik Gomer. So it says Reb Tzadok, but no one sees it that way. Even though ostensibly everybody is a maimin and divrei Chazal. I mean, Chazal say it. I believe in Chazal, right? But no one really believes it. No one really sees it that way. I'll prove it to you. That when it comes to shidduch, right? If you have two candidates for the shidduch, I don't mean a Baal Tshuva, a person who's newly from. I mean a person who was a Baal Aveira, a person who did terrible things, right? And has repented. No one is really interested in that shidduch, right? They'll take the Tzaddik Gomer any day over the Baal Tshuva of that variety. The person who did real terrible things. Yaakov will get the better shidduch than Esav no matter what. He says, but that's the point, he says, that the person whose deeds are beautiful, that's the Alma Disgalia, that everyone sees. That's visible. He says, the person whose inner core is good, but has to work through all the layers and layers and layers of flaws, that's really of greater beauty. But that's the Alma Discasia, that's concealed. No one can understand that. And that's what Leah was as opposed to Rachel. Yaakov wanted to marry Rachel, I believe. Because Yaakov held that his destiny was to be mitaso shleima. His destiny was to create perfection. That which his grandfather Avram didn't achieve, that which his father Yitzchak didn't achieve, he wanted to achieve. It should be mitaso shleima, no psul bizarre. He wanted to raise a generation that was perfect. And with whom do you raise such a generation? A person who is perfect. So when he saw that Rachel was beautiful, and again, when it says Yefas Torah Yefas Mara, beautiful in appearance, it means Yofi Hamasan, the beauty of deeds. He said, this is the Bazur, this is the person, this is the partner with whom I'm going to raise a perfect generation. But the Rebbeinu Shalom understood something else. The Rebbeinu Shalom understood that the Shleimus of Yaakov is not the perfection that every last descendant of Yaakov is squeaky clean and perfect. The perfection of Yaakov is something else. The perfection of Yaakov is that the kesher to the Rebbeinu Shalom is so strong that even those that try their best to sever their ties, they themselves still remain attached. Because Yisrael, Af B'Shchata Yisrael. So it says that's the Bechina of Leah. That's what Leah was. It was Leah, despite the fact that on the outside there was so much that appeared negative, but there was that core of goodness that could not be eliminated or diluted. That's the Kayach of Leah. And for the whole scheme, right, is not Yaakov did a chet and Lavan pulled a switch and therefore he ended up with the wrong thing and so on and so forth. It's all, that's Naira Lila, like the Medrash says. Rebbeinu Shalom makes everything a pretense. Right? So therefore, it looks like Yaakov did a chet, and therefore Lavan got the best of him, and therefore he ended up marrying Leah, and so on and so forth. It had to be this way. In other words, the real mother of Klal Yisrael had to be Leah, not Rachel. Right? Why? Precisely because the perfection of Rachel couldn't produce what had to be produced. What had to be produced, that which would thrive and survive the long run of centuries of tribulations and golus and persecutions and ups and downs, was the stability that Leah offered. And that's why the Rebbeinu Shalom was Masabev Sivas, that the real mother of Klal Yisrael should end up being Leah. And that, of course, is only a consequence of the fact that Yaakov married Leah first and not Rachel. But it's interesting, let's put out one last thing which is very, very intriguing. The Zohar asks the question, that it says that when the Klal Yisrael went into the Golus, so it was Rachel Mavak al Bonel. it was Rachel that was Mavaka. And the question is that Leah actually had more children than Rachel. So why is it that Rachel was one who specifically cries? And the answer is this. Because the hashpah of Leah, as the Ramchal explains, right, that is the shayrish of Hanhaga Lefi Hamasim. There's the ups and downs of Golos and Geula are all through the channel of Rachel. And therefore, who suffers when Klal Yisrael is in Golos? It's Rachel. Therefore, it's Rachel Mavakal Badeha. There's Leah, it makes no difference where we are, what we are, who we are. Our connection to the Rebbeinu Shalom through Leah is constant, it's stable, it's always the same. And therefore, Golos makes no difference, Ula makes no difference, Tzadika makes no difference, Yeshua makes no difference. There's some aspect of our connection to the Rebbeinu Shalom which is a constant, it is always the same, it is unchanging. That's the tzinor, that's the channel of Leah. The channel of Rachel is the ups and downs. Who is sensitive to the pain of Golos? That's Rachel. That's why it's Rachel Mavaka al Bonel. Now these ideas obviously are ideas which are beyond our hasaga. But the point I just want to bring out is this, that at the same time we're learning these parshias, and everything seems to be a consequence of decisions that individuals make, and maybe a consequence of averas and mistakes, and so on and so forth. But the Rebbeinu Shalom has a plan. He's not around Mila. There are pretenses. HaKadosh Baruch Hu guides the world through our actions, but really there's a plan. Part of this plan is that Leah should play this role, because the shleimus of Yaakov is not the shleimus that he thought he would achieve, right, which is to create a generations and generations of perfection. That would have been with Rachel. Instead, it was to create something which could keep, right, with the ups and downs, and that's through Rachel. Just to illustrate this, and we'll end with this famous Gemara in Chagig, we said many times before. The Gemara brings the pasuk, Hein b'kedoshav lo yamin, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't trust the holiest ones. So it's an amazing thing. If he doesn't trust the holy ones, who does he trust? The Rebbe didn't understand it. Until he once was traveling and he saw a person that was picking figs from a tree. And he was picking the unripe ones. So Rebbe asked him, aren't the ripe ones better? So he says, no. Hani lo urcha bin lo. I need them for a trip. Right? Hani natron b'hani lo natron. The ones that are ripe don't keep. The ones that aren't ripe, they keep for longer. So Rebbe said, oh, now I understand the hand of Kedusha lo yamin. There's an idea that things which are at the pinnacle of perfection, they don't keep. That's the idea of beauty. In other words, we said that Rachel, her midas and her mitzvahs, her good deeds, are metaphorically described as beauty. It says the nature of beauty is that it's fleeting. In other words, things are beautiful, a beautiful flower, right? It's beautiful for a moment, it reaches its peak of beauty, and then there's a decline, right? It withers, it fades away, and so on and so forth. The beauty of people is really sometimes the same way, the physical beauty of people. In other words, there's a level of perfection that you achieve a pinnacle of perfection, but there's no guarantee it will remain that way. It's very hard to stay at that very, very high plateau. Hein b'kedoshav lo yamin. HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't trust even the most holy ones. It says the ones that are less so, they have what it takes to survive that long trip. Right? That was the idea. The Maila of Leah over Rachel. HaKadosh Baruch Hu foresaw that the history of Klal Yisrael wouldn't be a history of ongoing, continuous perfection. It would be a history of challenges and ups and downs and even people becoming mumarim. It was necessary to establish the shorish of Klal Yisrael as such that it could last for that long road. That was through Leah, not through Rachel.